You're listening to episode 293 of The Secular Buddhist. Welcome to The Secular Buddhist. I'm Ted Meissner. The Secular Buddhist is the official podcast of the Secular Buddhist Association, a grassroots-driven effort to answer the needs of secular teaching and practice for contemporary society. The podcast has interviews and roundtable discussions pertaining to engaged Buddhist training and practice, and the SBA website has show notes for each episode along with resource materials. Though the podcast focuses on core practices from a secular viewpoint, more traditional teachings are welcome and openly discussed. Bonnie Sumana Ryan Fisher joins us to speak about her new book, Mindful Moment, 52 Weeks of Mindfulness, Exercises, and Reflections. Hi, everyone. Before we begin today's episode, I'd like to mention that this podcast and the supporting website, discussion forums, our live online practice circle, and other services provided by the Secular Buddhist Association are supported by you. If you find this episode or any other offerings helpful to you in some way, I ask that you take a moment and visit secularbuddhism.org and click on the contributions button. There are many ways you can help, which are listed on that page. And if you make a donation, it's tax deductible and helps ensure the SBA is able to continue the exploration of secular Buddhism. Thank you. We're glad to have you join us on the conversation. For those interested, applications are now open for the Mindfulness-based stress reduction program starting in July of 2018. It's online, live, from the convenience of your home, and offered on a donation basis. This is the full 8-week program developed by Jon Kabat-Zinn, used as the gold standard for the scientific study of secular mindfulness. And this is the only MBSR online live program that doesn't have an upfront price of hundreds of dollars. At the end of the program, participants simply make the donation they can. To apply, please visit presentmomentmindfulness.com. When I first heard about secular mindfulness programs like MBSR, I had a judgmental reaction. This isn't sati. You can't condense mindfulness into 8 weeks. This is a watering down. All of the usual criticisms from a traditional Buddhist point of view, even though I'm secular. Fortunately, this internal monologue did not go unnoticed, nor did it escape the reality of it being based in ignorance. I've changed since then, hopefully grown and learned, and now see that one context of mindfulness doesn't have ownership over another context of this way of being in the world. There still remains a dichotomy, however, that these have to be different things. Our guest today shows how we Buddhists can encounter mindfulness in a way that's still as Buddhists. Bonnie Ryan Fisher is a dedicated lay Buddhist practitioner who leads meditation and yin yoga classes in Whitecourt, Alberta, Canada. She's also a longtime writer whose recent work inclines towards the Dhamma. Bonnie's first meditation teachers were found in books, and her practice began in the 90s in a great deal of isolation. In 2014, 2 years after finally founding a sitting group in her hometown, she launched her blog, Mindful Moment, as a place to share that 20-year journey with others also finding their way. Special thanks to John Negru, our dear friend at the Sumana Press, for his coordination of today's interview. So, sit back, relax, and have a nice apple cinnamon spice tea. Our guest today is Bonnie Sumana Ryan Fisher. Bonnie, welcome to the podcast. So nice to see you.
Thank you. It's very nice to be here.
So let's just dive right in. How did you first encounter Buddhism?
Well, I started by reading about it, which makes sense to me because I'm a reader and an academic, and that's always where I begin. So lots of reading to begin with. And then I think the reading ramped up because I was going through a serious illness. So it suddenly became a little bit more important. And there was a book, I think it's, I don't know if I'm going to remember the author, but it was called God in All Worlds. But God in All Worlds, I noticed that when I was going through it and reading it, that all of the quotations that resonated with me turned out to be either Buddhist or Taoist. And so that sent me off doing a lot more reading about these things. And that was a sideways move. I wanted to learn to meditate, and I was finding that the books were kind of, those very abstract instructions about, well, you should sit for 2 hours and you should be, and do what? And,
Yes, exactly.
kind of things. And I just felt like, I know I'm missing something here and something should be going on. And so at the time, Spirit Rock, or actually it was the Berry Center that was offering that program with cassette tapes and a book and all these things on insight meditation. And so that was my start. Although when I filled out the questionnaire about why was I taking this, I said to relieve stress. And I didn't think I wanted any of the Buddhist package. I thought I just want what I want. A friend is now since called instant coffee. My husband calls it Tylenol. So I wanted, and I'm noticing in the beginning meditators when they come to the class that I teach now, life is rough and you hit a spot where things are not going the way you want them to, and your usual coping mechanisms are not working very well. And so in your shuffling around through all of the possibilities, you run across this thing where people are talking about peace and calm and serenity and, oh, yeah, that's what I want. And so you step into the meditation. And then it was interesting to find that as I stepped into that, with this first little bit of serenity, I started realizing, eventually it took a while to realize that's not really what I want. I don't want to escape. I want to figure out how to work with this, what's going on in my life, because escape isn't going to do it, because every time I get up off the cushion, it's waiting for me anyway. So I can forget for a little while that I'm sick or that there's this problem in my life or there's whatever. But as soon as I get up, it's back. So that was the beginning, starting to open up a little bit to maybe I do want to know a little bit more about this Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path and what the context of meditation is, not just sit down and be calm for a while. What's this context? What am I after? So I guess that was the introduction.
Yeah, how is this not a technique, but a way of being? There's more.
Yeah, way of being, not just a few pointers and I'm going to sit down and be calm. It's not just counting to 10, and controlling your temper or something. It's something much bigger than that. And it started to make sense to me. So that was the beginning. And then, as I say in the introduction to the book, that I was looking for connections with people after a while. For a while, I had my distance tutor in that course. She was in Hawaii and we talked on email because internet, this was in the 90s. Internet was not what it is now. So it was email exchanges. And I wanted a real person to share with. And it took me a while to do that. And Edmonton, which is the closest city here, it's about 2 hours away. That was where I finally found Light of the Dhamma, a group, a Theravada meditation group. I actually sent out emails to a number, and I went to one Zen one and one Tibetan one, and then I went to this one, but it just was an instant connection. I went to Light of the Dhamma, and I just felt home. This is what works for me, and I never quit going. And then Light of the Dhamma had the connection with Birkin, which connected me deeper to monastics as teachers. And that's where it all began.
Lovely journey. What I find very interesting about this is it's one of the uncommon times in guests here on the podcast who spent the time to do a little reflection and check out several different areas and places to go in different traditions instead of, well, this is the one that's close by, and therefore, gosh, I'm a fill in the blank. And
yeah. Well, that may come from living in a small town where there was no one here that I knew of. I'm sure that there were other people doing that. We just couldn't find each other because there was no center, there was no temple, there was nothing like that. So it was, okay, Edmonton's close, and Edmonton's big enough that it had all these choices. And in fact, I did end up joining a online women's Zen group that ran parallel to a lot of things. And that satisfied some other things in terms of connecting with a number of women, particularly that were practicing. But it was as I say, sort of testing a little bit here and there and finding where I felt comfortable. So I think I'm lucky that way because I've heard the same story from other practitioners about, well, there was only a Shambhala center, or there was only a Zen center, or there was only, so that's where I went and sort of found my way into that. And I guess it's kind of like in my upbringing, I was raised United Church. That's where I went to Sunday school. That's where my parents took me. I didn't ask any questions about other kinds of Christianity until I was in university and started meeting people that were, wow, there's lots of things going on out there. But I didn't experiment past Christianity for a very long time because I was in my 40s because I'm 63 now. So I was in my 40s when I began practice. Wow, to be finding this in your 40s, it's a long time. Why didn't I know it existed? And I'm a philosophy major too. Yes. But at a Western university, in the 80s, I did my MA in my 80s. Oh, Eastern philosophy was not on the menu.
Yeah, I've heard that complaint a lot from folks who are steeped in Buddhism, is that Eastern philosophies are not included in Western philosophy programs.
I think it's changing. I taught do you know Athabasca University at all? It's a distance university up here, and I taught for them for 18 years. I taught philosophy for them via computer, telephone, that kind of thing, because it's a distance one. And just in the last 2 or 3 years I was with them, they were starting to add Eastern philosophy courses to the program, just as I was leaving. And I left them when we started the dog kennel, and my life got too busy, and I couldn't do so many jobs. And so I let that go. But when I was a student, no, nothing. It was all European, British, not even a sniff of it, like that. I certainly met the existentialists. I was lucky because my thesis advisor was German. So she made a lot more room for the Europeans, but not for Buddhism, not for any of the Eastern philosophies. Yeah.
So let's shift a little bit into our main topic is your book. And I'm curious what made you decide to put this together. And I'm choosing my words carefully, knowing how it came to be.
Yeah. Well, the book grew in fits and starts, I think. When I was an early practitioner and I was practicing alone, I've been a writer for a long, long time. And most of my writing has been magazines, journals. I did a newspaper column for about 5 years. So I've been a writer for a long time. And I was also a personal writer, right? I did a lot of journals. And my journals have categories. There's my reader's journal and my personal journal and my spiritual journals. And because I do a lot of writing. So it started out, that was my way of talking through what I was experiencing as an early days on the path, noticing this change, these internal changes, noticing the person who had only wanted to relax and be calm, becoming somebody who was realizing that there was something more to this, that I want to understand. I think I'm starting to understand life in a different way, and I want more of that because I think it's going to add to my capacity for living the kind of life I want to live. And it's going to make me have a more harmonious life, have a life that's calmer, that kind of thing. So I wanted to record those things. So I've been keeping these journals right from the beginning. Around 2000, 2001, which is pretty, when I think about it now, was kind of, I don't know, courageous or foolish or something. I suddenly decided I can do a book of these. And so I started trying to put some pieces together that I had then. And what happened was, it's actually in one of the passages that's included in the book. My mom passed away, and it was very sudden. She had a heart attack and she was in a coma for a few days and she didn't wake up. But it was a sudden interruption. It wasn't one of these illnesses where you got a long time to kind of deal with something. It was very quick. And in the emotional aftermath and the surges that were coming up that I was working with, I stopped being able to write about it for a while. I tried, but it wasn't working very well. And so I decided, who was I to think that I could share this practice right yet? I'm still, there's so much going on for me, and I'm still so easily swept away. And coming back to, I just feeling at sea, really, again, and having to sort of, begin again in a very big way, not just the little ways that come from losing your temper with your 4-year-old or, those kinds of things, but in a very big way, having to revisit things. So I set that aside, that idea, and I just kept writing the journals. In 2012, we retired from the kennel in 2011. So in 2012, I invited my friend from the former monk that I mentioned before to come to Whitecourt to give a retreat. And he said, sure, but you can't leave all the people that come to the retreat hanging. If I do that, you have to start some kind of meditation group in Whitecourt. And I said, not fair. I actually had a really interesting discussion with him at that point, because I said, how do I start a group? And I'd been practicing for a long time by then, but I said, I'm not a teacher. And his answer to me has stayed the background for me through everything after. He said, there are all kinds of teachers. And in our conversation, what evolved for me is, I'm a companion on the path teacher. I'm a teacher that's saying, I don't know about this stuff much more than you guys. I'm just trying really hard. I see the value. I'm trying really hard to bring it into my life. And this is what I'm doing while I'm trying to make it part of my life. These are the things that are working for me. These are the things that are not working so well for me. These are the problems I have. These are the moments of despair. These are the moments of insight. I just want to share it. And so I started that meditation group. And then sort of fortuitously, almost at the same time, there was some kind of new age of blooming in my small town. And a yoga studio opened. And a friend was going to the yoga classes and also coming to my meditation group. And we were renting a little grubby room for $15 for each meeting, kind of thing, for ours, sitting on a dirty floor that was walked on during the day, that kind of thing. She said, go talk to them at the yoga studio. And I did. And they welcomed us there. But they said, then instead of a little group, we want it to be classes. So people can drop in if they want. And we'll put it on our schedule. So then it was, this is about the way things unfold. Once I started the classes there, I wanted a way of communicating with people on an ongoing basis, not just the once a week in classes. And so I started my blog. And originally I thought, I'll use the website for, here's the meditation schedule, here's some interesting places for you to get more information. And the blogs were just going to be something that I might have talked about in one of the meetings or something that happened for me this week, something that I worked with this week, that kind of thing in my practice. And then that made me think about all that writing I had, this pile of journals, and the fact that at this point in my life, I was well into my 50s, and a lot of the people who were coming were very young, and the things that were going on in their life were things I had already, like, they're saying, like, how do you do this when you got a 2-year-old that, won't sleep through the night, and I've got, this kind of thing. And I thought, well, here I am now, my kids are grown and gone, but I've been through that. So I went back looking at things in my journals. And so what I started doing on the blog was putting in some of the things I was writing now, and pulling things out of my old journals and putting them up, things I was writing way back when I'd only been practicing for, I think one of the earliest ones in there was written in the 90s. So I'd been practicing for just a few years through to practicing 10 years, 15 years, that kind of thing. I had a piece in one of John's books, lotus petals in the snow, I think. Mm-hmm. It was a collection of writing by Buddhist women in Canada. And I submitted something for that. The editor of that piece said to me, "Why don't you talk to John about doing a book?" And I let that sit for about a year. And then I said, okay. And said, here's what I'm doing. Talked to him about it and said, it started out as a book idea. It's come all kinds of weird places. I think it could still be a book. And there you go. That's a long story.
But it's a good story. And I was thinking, if you're familiar with the Pali term papance, that their proliferation, there's just this popcorning of so many things, one leading to the next, leading to three other things. And that resulted in this coming to be. So, and I'm glad you brought up John, because I do mention this at the beginning of the podcast, but just again, a special shout out and thanks to John Negru of Sumana Press for all his help and drive in just running Sumana Press and bringing them to others. So deep bows to you, John. So, Bonnie, what have you found to be difficult as you were writing the blog or your journals? What were some of the things that were snags for you or caused you to pause?
I think when I was first writing my journals, I don't remember too many of those because they were a lot like keeping a diary, right? You're writing to yourself and you're writing, processing. Writing has always been, I've been a writer for ever and ever, long before I considered myself a Buddhist. And so writing has always been my way of processing in one way or another. But when I started doing a public blog, I did get some snags. One of the things was that I'm writing about my practice, which means that I'm writing about my life, which means that I'm writing about my friends and my family and my children and my husband and the things that are going on in my world. So I wanted to be honest about those things, that things are not always harmonious, they're not always lovely. I wanted to be honest about those, but I also wanted to be gentle and respectful of my kids and my husband and my friends and my sister and the people that feature in my life. And so I noticed that I had to think about my style of writing in terms of I'm not going to write down with somebody's name directly. I'm not going to necessarily put all the details of some exchange. I live in a small town. I think it's about 10,000 people now, but I've watched it grow. It was about 6,000 when we moved here. And it's still very much a small town where people know one another. And so what I noticed was when I started writing the blog, I wanted to think of ways of sharing my experience, I suppose, in a way that was, I don't want to say less personal, because I still wanted all my personal responses in there. But I wanted to be able to just approach, for example, what happens when you're angry and maybe say that it came out of an exchange, but not say so much about what the exchange was about, and what.
So much the story, it's more your experience. What was going on?
It became more internal. What was interesting was because of my choice then to go back to my old journals and use them, was that I didn't worry about it in those journals. So when I started using those, I had to do some editing. I had to do some, I'm not going to write those first two ranting paragraphs about this exchange. I'm just going to move into how did I process this, and then come from there. So that's been an interesting kind of thing because it has to be, I think it's really important to be very, very honest. People have really odd conceptions of what it is, I think, sometimes to be working on making mindfulness a way of life. I had a friend say to me I said something about being anxious about something one day, and he said, "You're a meditator, you shouldn't be anxious." And I thought, I meditate because I'm anxious.
I'm a human meditator.
And I thought if I were enlightened, I wouldn't be needing this process. It's because I'm not that I'm using this process, and because I'm not is why anxiety and anger and particular things. And for me, anxiety is one of those default settings. I love Sylvia Boorstein, Sylvia Boorstein stuff, because that's one of the things she says about herself. And I just go, yes. It's one of my default settings. It's one of those places I go really fast and really easily when life is uneasy. I'm not a person that tends to go to anger a lot. I will go there, but it's not one of my default settings. But I will go anxious so fast, And so I want to be honest about that, and that this is a constant process. It's constant vigilance. It's not, I memorize a few kind of techniques and rules, and I got it. I got this. It's watching all the time what's going on in my mind, the weather in my mind, the voices in my mind, the stories I'm starting to tell myself, the actions that I fall into, some still often less than 20 years ago, thank goodness, but still fall into even the actions, like out of thought, out of just being internal. It becomes external before I catch it. That still happens. And I have to find a way. I don't just give up. I don't just say this isn't, because I know that mindfulness is changing my life for the better, and it's changing my interactions with people around me for the better. So it filters out into the world. And the more of us that are doing that are trying to be constantly vigilant, to use right effort in our lives, are doing something that is not just for me. It's for the world. It's for all of us. So I said, honesty, I think, is super important. But there is this thing where you go, I know when I wrote my column years ago, we lived in an even smaller town of 3,000 when I wrote a little column for the local paper. It was just local stuff. I know I went through some of that then. We had no children, but my husband would go, something that was in the paper that week, like, okay, your life come out there and be really public. And so I was very conscious of that.
Yeah.
And that's definitely something I had to work my way through.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's working. None of my family has confronted me with something that I'm really upset about. I don't know how many of them read it all the time, or, that kind of thing, but they haven't, maybe they've got their heads in the sand and it's serious.
So let's talk a little bit about the structure. One of the things I liked about the book is that it's a book that's not just ideological views and philosophical outlinings from a Buddhist perspective. This is practice. Mm-hmm. So I wonder if you could say a little bit about the subtitled 52 Weeks of Mindfulness Exercises and Reflections part.
Well, when I come to that, we have to give another bow to John. I was looking for a way to structure this. And when I first came to him with the idea, I had threw out 2 or 3 things that I was thinking about, which honestly don't even come to mind anymore, were ways that I was going to put these things together. And John looked at my website, and on my website I have a page that is mindfulness. I can't remember what I call it. But anyway, it's very practical. Mindfulness tips, I think it is. That's what I called on the website. And so it was a collection of these really practical things that have come out of leading a meditation group, have come out of doing so much reading, have come out of having lots of Dhamma conversations with people over time, have come out of various courses I've taken, Awakening Joy with James Ferraz, and some online courses with Michael Stone, when Michael was still with us, still teaching, out of my yoga training, yin training. And so I'd put very practical things in there, and things I just did when my kids were small or stuff like that. And John saw this list, and he said, I think I had 50 points on that list at the time. He said, can you make it 52? And what if we do it like this? And it was brilliant. It was brilliant, and so brilliant this, which brilliant does, that it was obvious right then. It was just so brilliant. It was, yes, that's what you do, because then I'm doing what I want, which is to offer people the techniques, but say it's not all about just these little techniques. These little techniques are helpful. These practical things are helpful, but you have to keep working them into your life. And then here's some ways I've worked them into my life.
So what are some of the things that you've learned over the years that have been most helpful to you in your own practice?
Most helpful in my own practice. The very first gift to me of practice was stillness, was learning to be still in a society that does not particularly value stillness, that there was a great deal of, I was always a really busy person. You're doing things in the community, you're doing volunteer stuff, you're working, you're raising kids, you're studying. Studying was always part of the background. And I wasn't really good at being still. I wanted to fill time. And I would have said I was filling time productively. I wasn't just entertaining myself and distracting myself. I was being productive. I was doing. But if you took those things away from me for some period of time, and my illness began to do that, I started noticing how hard that could be, how all the kind of space that was entered there. And so the first gift was just having some idea about how to be still and how to be with the stillness without moving out of my skin. I can remember being very excited about being able to sit for 10 minutes without thinking of a reason, because I sat alone by myself at home, without thinking of a reason that I needed to get up and start again. I'll just start supper and then I'll come back and I'll try again. I'll just go load in the laundry and I'll come back and I'll try again. And so the first time that like 10 minutes went by that I actually convinced my body to stay there, even if my mind was not, was a major accomplishment for me. And then it was very, very gradual, noticing that, hey, sometimes the mind stays here too. Hit and miss, but it stays here. So that was the first gift, I think. After that, it was the amazing stuff that just rolls out of practice, the noticing that you're handling things differently, the noticing the greater depths of patience and the greater depths of compassion, the greater depths of forgiveness. And I'm not talking just about to other people, but also to yourself.
Right. The hard one is internally directed metta.
Exactly. That you don't immediately start being angry with yourself because something didn't go well or you haven't accomplished what you wanted to. It just kind of went from there. Thanks to Ajahn Sona, I have also learned the great value that took me a long time of continuous effort. That it's not just about let go, but it's not passive. It's active effort to incline my mind in skillful directions in those things. So that's been a big thing. I took James Barra's course, Awakening Joy, just a few years ago. And the reason I took it was I also felt that my practice personally tends to move too easily towards concentration, serenity, the still things, and less towards joy, so that it can very easily become grim determination. And so I really appreciated the gifts of his course, because that let me have some more ways of introducing the conscious cultivation of joy as part of the path.
So do you have any favorite or recommended or perhaps most challenging chapter from the book?
I think because all lives do, different pieces are recommended at different times. That's why I try in the introduction to say to people, you don't need to start on week 1 and work your way through. You can dip. I'm having a week where I'm very worried about my anger management. I've had too many arguments with people. I'm having a week where I'm feeling overwhelmed. I'm so busy. And then maybe those subject headings, those content headings would give you an idea where you want to go that week. And I think that would be ultimately one of the most skillful ways to use what's here. However, I couldn't design it that way because everybody's life is different. Unless maybe you had done it in Flash. Now you're making me think, flashcards. And you go, or a computer program where you choose what's applicable this week and it chooses for you, like those novels where you choose the next scene. But in the book, that meant that I just wanted to encourage people to use it differently if they want to. If you want, and I know people who are using it both ways. My kid's sister's a dipper. She's dipping and talks to me about things that she just kind of gets into. I have a longtime Zen friend who is working her way methodically.
Really, a Zen friend who does things methodically. Say it isn't no.
She's also an academic, though. So we're used to discipline. Yes, I will take this horrible textbook and I will work my way through. So I think it can be used either way really effectively. I also think it could be used in the way that I've often used things like the Dhammapada, which I keep in a basket by my favorite evening chair. In that the Dhammapada is one where you can just pick it up and open and take a taste, and in some way it's going to speak to where you are right now. Oh, I've never seen it fail. Anyway, it always speaks to where I am in some way. And so I think this could work that way too. Poetry too. I love to read poetry. I'm not a poet myself, although I was brazen enough to put some of my gathas in here. But there's things that you can just pick up and take a tiny piece. Yeah. And if that's the way you want to use it, then I think that's lovely too. I think it work that way too.
Bonnie, do you have any other recommendations or thoughts or things you'd like to share with the listeners?
I think I talked a lot. Not necessarily. I think it's important, and I know I always find myself saying this in my meditation classes here too, and with people I work with, to not be discouraged, and that's what I'm hoping the whole book does, is convince people that you're not alone in constantly feeling that you're starting over or that you've learned this lesson before. Why do I need it again? Not to be discouraged, and that doesn't mean you're not making progress in the way that we Westerners want to make progress. And so I like images like, and I'm sure it shows up in my blog because it's one that I like, either a labyrinth or a spiral staircase, in that it may look like you're always looking out on the same world, but you're always looking from a slightly different place. And to find a way of fitting it into their life, I guess, is the other one. If you've got 2-year-olds and you can only do 20-second meditations, between, do that. If the only place that it's quiet is while you're having your shower in the morning, then use that time. I don't feel you have to do. I think I was discouraged by early books I read that said things like sit 2 hours a day.
Yeah.
And I thought, I can't do it.
Yeah.
Start where you are. That's what we tell our yoga students.
Mm-hmm.
So start where you are, and you will find it has a life of its own as it begins to really come alive for you.
Wonderful words. Our guest today, Bonnie Sumana Ryan Fisher. You can find out more about Bonnie on her website, and we'll link to that on the episode page for the episode. And of course, we'll have a link to the book, Mindful Moment, 52 Weeks of Mindfulness, Exercises and Reflections. Bonnie, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much, Ted, for inviting me. I really appreciated the opportunity.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to hear more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the SBA website at secularbuddhism.org, and you'll find an entire webpage devoted to this and every episode. Discussion about this episode can be found on the episode page itself, along with show notes. Sound editing, mixing, and mastering provided by the generosity of Anthony Dominello of StructureFromSound.com. The music for The Secular Buddhist is used by permission from John Kaizen Neptune's CD, Steps in Time. Additional music is provided courtesy of Monty Levinson of Taihei Shakuhachi and Rodrigo Rodriguez. Their websites are linked on the SBA site on the About Podcast Music page. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on The Secular Buddhist.